Hello and welcome back to another Commander deck video. Today we're going to be looking at Yuna Grand Summoner. Now Final Fantasy X was my favorite Final Fantasy game. In this deck you'll see I kept as many Final Fantasy X cards in it as I could. Let's see, so Yuna, she's a 1/5 Grand Summon. You can tap, add 1 mana of any color. When you next cast a creature spell this turn, that creature enters with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever another permanent you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, if it had 1 or more counters on it, you may put that many +1/+1 counters on target creature. So this deck is going to be Final Fantasy X themed, um, with lots of stuff with counters. Just putting +1/+1 counters on stuff. Let's go ahead and dig in. Weathered Wayfarer. Look at all the counters you can create from that. Can pay a white, tap, search your library for a land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Activate only if an opponent controls more lands than you. Hopeful Initiate. A 1/2. He's got training. You can pay 3, remove 2 +1 counters from among creatures you control. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Noble Hierarch. Exalted. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, that creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And you can add a green, white, or blue. Birds of Paradise. Add 1 mana of any color. Scholar of New Horizons. This creature enters with a +1/+1 counter on it. And you can tap remove a counter from a permanent you control. Search your library for a plains card, reveal it. If an opponent controls more lands than you, you may put that card onto the battlefield tapped. If you don't put the card onto the battlefield, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So, I like how you can go get a plains just by removing a counter from a permanent you control. And if they don't control more lands than you, you can still put it into your hand. Dusk Legion Duelist. A 2/2 vampire soldier with vigilance, and whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Dusk Legion, draw a card. The ability triggers once each turn. Incubation Druid. A 0/2 Elf Druid. Add 1 mana of any type that a land you control could produce. If this creature has a +1/+1 counter on it, add 3 mana of that type instead. And you can pay 5 and adapt 3. If this creature has no 1/1 counters on it, put 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Sage of Hours. A human wizard, 1/1. Heroic. Whenever you cast a spell that targets Sage of Hours, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Remove all +1/+1 counters from Sage of Hours. For each 5 counters removed this way, take an extra turn. So, not going to be doing a lot of casting spells that target him to put the counter on. There's other ways to put counters on him. Shalinda, Yvonne Alkalite, or Yevon Alkalite, excuse me. A 2/2 lifelink, and whenever another creature you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature if its power is less than Shalinda's power. Otherwise, put a +1/+1 counter on Shalinda. Seymour Guado. A 2/2 legendary human druid Whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of any type that permanent produced. And you can pay 7, look at the top 5 cards of your library, put a non-human creature card from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So it's not like I have a ton of things that are non-land permanents for mana, like, yeah, birds, yeah, Noble Hierarch. He's mainly in there because he's, one of the antagonists from Final Fantasy X. Maester Seymour, a 1/3 human elf cleric. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to Maester Seymour's power onto another target creature you control. And he's got Monstrosity X for 5, where X is the number of counters among creatures you control. So if you can use that Monstrosity X, and you got, let's say, 4 counters on other creatures, you put 4 counters on him, then he becomes a 5/7, and then at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can put 5 +1/+1 counters onto another target creature you control. Evolution Witness, a 2/1 Elf Shaman Mutant. You can pay 2 and adapt 2. And whenever one or more +1/+1 counters on put on Evolution Witness, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Tremel, Seymour's Butler, a 2/3 Elf Advisor, legendary. Each other non-token creature you control enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. And you can pay 1 tap and proliferate X times, where X is a number of non-token creatures you control that entered this turn. Lulu, Stern Guardian. Whenever an opponent attacks you, choose target creature attacking you, put a stun counter on that creature. So, stun counter, it won't untap during its controller's next untap step. And you can pay 4 and proliferate. So there's the mage of Final Fantasy X. Riku, Resourceful Guardian. Whenever you put 1 or more counters on a creature until end of turn, that creature can't be blocked by creatures your opponents control. And you can steal, pay 1 tap, move a counter from target creature and opponent controls onto target creature you control. Activate only as a sorcery. So, oh, you got a counter over there? What was it, a death touch counter? Hey, I'm going to steal that. Appreciate it. Arwen, Mortal Queen. So when Arwen enters the battlefield, it enters with a indestructible counter on her. And you can pay 1, remove the indestructible counter, and another target creature gains indestructible until end of turn. You put a +1/+1 counter and a lifelink counter on that creature, and you do the same for Arwen. Janara, Ashura of War, a 3/3 flyer, and you can pay 2, 1 and a white, and put a +1/+1 counter on her. Titus, Yuna's Guardian. So we got a 3/3 legendary human warrior. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may move a counter from target creature you control onto a second target creature you control. And then you can cheer. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control with counters on them deal combat damage to a player, you may draw a card and proliferate. I did this only once. So in the game, his cheer ability would raise strength and defense. Not very much, but that's what his ability did. Arin, Venerated Guardian. A 2/5 human spirit samurai with vigilance and shooting star. Whenever Arn attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. When you do, exile target creature defending player controls with power less than Arn's power until Arn leaves the battlefield. So Shooting Star was one of Arn's overdrive abilities. Just knock an opponent just out of the battle to see peace. Herald of Secret Streams. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them can't be blocked. Waka, Devoted Guardian. A 4/4 Reach Trample. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, destroy up to one target artifact that player controls. And then you put a 1/1 counter on him. And then Blitzball Captain, at the beginning of your end step, if a counter was put on Waka this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. Yeah. Altered Ego. This spell can't be countered. And you can pay X along with the 4. And it would enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield except it enters with X +1/+1 counters on it. Fathom Mage, a 1/1 human wizard. It has Evolve. Whenever a creature you control enters, if it has greater power or toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and whenever a 1/1 counter is put on this creature, you may draw a card. Zimone, Paradox Sculptor, a 1/4 human wizard. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on each above to 2 target creatures you control. And you can pay a green and a blue tap, double the number of each kind of counters on up to 2 target creatures and or artifacts you control. Master Biomancer, a 2/4 elf wizard. Each other creature you control enters the battlefield with a number of additional +1/+1 counters equal to his power, and is a mutant in addition to its other types. So if I can get counters on him and get some other creatures in, they can get some nice counters. Kamari, Valiant Guardian, a 3/3 Cat Warrior, Vigilance, Ronso Rage. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Kamari and tap target creature an opponent controls. Then you may have Kamari become a copy of that creature, except its name is Kamari, and it has Vigilance and this ability. So I got the Ronso there. Alright, Marcus, Mutant Mare. A 4/4 Mutant Advisor, Vigilance Trample. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. If that creature has a +1/+1 counter on it. If it doesn't, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Sab Sunan, Luxa Embodied. A 6/6 Reach, Trample, Indestructible. It can't attack or block unless it has an even number of counters on it. At the beginning of your first main phase, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then if it has an odd number of counters on it, draw 2 cards. Sigarda, Host of Herons, a 5/5 flying hexproof. Spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause you to sacrifice permanents. So, nothing to do with counters, but me and my angels and just try to save things from being sacrificed. Quilled Great Worm, a 7/7 trample. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage during your turn, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. It must survive to get the counters. You may cast this card from your graveyard by removing 6 counters from among creatures you control, in addition to paying its other costs. Sin, Unending Cataclysm, a 5/5 flying trample. As it enters, remove all counters from any number of artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. Sin enters with X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is twice the number of counters removed this way. And when it dies, put its counters on target creature you control, then shuffle this card into its owner's library. Alright, that's all for the creatures. No surprise here. A Soul Ring, which that is the save sphere from Final Fantasy X. Adamantium Bonding Tank, otherwise known as the Ozolith. So, whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on Adamantium Bonding Tank. At the beginning of each combat on your turn, if it has counters on it, you may move all counters from it onto target creature. Blitzball Stadium. When this artifact enters support X, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to X target creatures. Hello? Here we go. Go for the goal. You can pay 3 tap until end of turn. Target creature gains when this creature deals combat damage to a player. Draw a card for each kind of counter on it. And it can't be blocked this turn. So Blitzball was a cool side game you could play. Arcane Signet. I got Titus's necklace there. Swiftfoot Boots. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste. Ozolith, the Shattered Spire. If one or more +1/+1 counters will be put on an artifact or creature you control, that many +1 are put on it instead. And you can pay 2 tap, put a +1/+1 counter on target artifact or creature you control. Activate as a sorcery. And you can cycle it for 2 and draw a card. The Party Tree. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. You can tap, add 2 green, and gain 2 life. And then whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. That'll do it for the artifacts. Enchantments, we have Hardened Scales. So we've got Titus there battling his father, Jack. If one or more counters, +1/+1 counters, will be put on a creature you control, that many +1 are put on it instead. Sphere Grid, the upgrade system for Final Fantasy X. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. And unlock ability, creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have reach and trample. That a baby. Together Forever. When this enchantment enters, support 2. So put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. And you can pay 1, choose target creature with a counter on it. When that creature dies this turn, return it to his owner's hand. Branching Evolution. If one or more +1/+1 counters will be put on a creature you control, twice that many +1/+1 counters are put on it instead. Broker's Ascendancy. At the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and a loyalty counter on each planeswalker you control. So, yeah, there you go. Smile at Death. At the beginning of your upkeep, return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and you put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures. Inexorable Tide. Whenever you cast a spell, Proliferate. So nice art from Xanarkand there. That'll do it for the enchantments. And for sorceries, we have Newfound Adventure, which is Farseek. Search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card. Put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Revisits. Search your library for a forest card. Put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Yuna's Decision. Choose one. Continue the pilgrimage. Sacrifice a creature. If you do draw a card, then you may put a creature card and or land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Find Another Way. Return 1 or 2 target permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. Wave Goodbye. Return each creature without a +1/+1 counter on it to its owner's hand. Promise of Loyalty. Each player puts a vow counter on a creature they control and sacrifices the rest. Each of those creatures can attack you or planeswalkers you control as long as it has a vow counter on it. So nice artwork there from the beginning of the game. Damning Verdict. Destroy all creatures with no counters on them. Farewell. Choose one or more. Exile all artifacts, exile all creatures, or enchantments, or graveyards. Path to Exile. Exile target creature. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card and put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Swords to Plowshares. Exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Enlightened Tutor. Search your library for an artifact or enchantment card, reveal it, then shuffle and put that card on top. An Offer You Can't Refuse. Counter target non-creature spell. Its controller creates 2 treasure tokens. So, got Riku there. And Titus. Protection Magic. Put a shield counter on up to 3 target creatures. So a shield counter, you would remove a shield counter from a creature you control if it was dealt damage or destroyed. We have Heroic Intervention, Japanese version, because English were sold out. So I got Aerith there with Cloud. We've got Cyclonic Rift with Hope. Again, Japanese version, because English sells out in blink of an eye. Inspiring Call. Draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Those creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. And that very awkward ha 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 scene in the game. Endless Detour. The owner of target spell, non-land permanent, or card in a graveyard puts it on their choice of on top or bottom of their library. And that's Riku being scared of the Thunder Plains. Yuna's Whistle. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And when you reveal a creature card this way, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is the mana value of that card. So Yuna and Titus basically, made a pact that if they whistled, one of them whistled, the other one would come running. Broker's Confluence. Choose 3. You may choose the same mode more than once. Proliferate. Target creature phases out. Counter target activated or triggered ability. And that's going to do it for the spells. And for lands, we have Command Tower. Got Xanark in there. Exotic Orchard. So there's Guadasalam, where Seymour lived. Path of Ancestry. So you can scry if a creature that you cast is either a human or a cleric, because that's what Yuna is. Seaside Citadel. Flooded Strand, pay a life. Search your library for a plains or island card. Put it onto the battlefield. Windswept Heath. Tap, pay 1 life, sacrifice it. Search for a forest or plains card. Put it onto the battlefield. I do not have a Misty Rainforest for this deck, unfortunately. Got Hallowed Fountain. Shockland. Temple Garden. Enters tapped unless you pay 2 life. And Breeding Pool. Another Shockland. Irrigated Farmland. It enters tapped and you can cycle it for 2. Discard it, draw a card. Scattered Groves. A Forest Plains. Enters tapped and you can cycle it for 2 to draw a card. Flooded Grove. Nice picture there. Macalania. Deserted Beach. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Overgrown Farmland. Same thing. Enters tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Rejuvenating Springs. Enters tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. Temple of Enlightenment. So that's like under the ice lake. That's where you get Shiva. Temple of Plenty. That's the Kilika Temple. Enters tapped and you scry 1. Temple of Mystery. Enters tapped. Scry 1. So that's a cool temple. Right there by the Calm Lands. Glacial Fortress. Enters tapped unless you control a plains or an island. Sunpetal Grove. Enters tapped unless you control a forest or a plains. Hinterland Harbor. Enters tapped unless you control a forest or an island. These are all artwork from Final Fantasy X. You know, there's the Shoe Puff there. Rides the Shoe Puff. Sky Cloud Expanse. Pay 1 tap, and a white and a blue. Sungrass Prairie. Pay 1 tap, and a green and a white. Overflowing Basin. Pay 1 tap, add a green and a blue. Brushland. Good picture of the calm lands there. One of the battles where they fought Sin. So you can add a colorless or a green or a white, and it deals 1 damage to you. Oron Reef, the Vast Wood. It enters tapped. You can tap, add a green, and you can tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. Hall of Heliod's Generosity. Tap, add a colorless. You can pay 1 and a white. Tap, put target enchantment card from your graveyard on top of your library. Gavany Township. Can add a colorless. And you can pay 2, a green and a white. Tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Nesting Grounds. Can add a colorless or pay 1 tap, move a counter from target permanent you control onto a second target permanent. Activate only as a sorcery. So that's pretty cool. In the Macalania Woods, they had something you had to do where you had to avoid the red butterflies and just get the blue ones. So I believe that helped get an item required for one of the celestial weapons. Ghost Quarter. Tap, add a colorless or sacrifice it. Destroy target land, and its controller may search their library for a basic land card. Put it onto the battlefield. And then we have 2 plains, 2 forests, and 2 islands, which I really like this island. It's got the Yuna's home, where she's from, Besaid, the beach there. And that's going to do it for the Yuna Grand Summoner deck. So, hey, be sure to let me know what you like, what you don't like. You know, leave a comment what you think would be better. Again, I tried to keep as many Final Fantasy cards in as possible. I know there's plenty of other creatures that do lots of +1/+1 counter things. Um, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Be sure to like and subscribe. And I'll be back with another Final Fantasy deck soon. Until then, you guys have a good one.